Do you get frustrated because you feel like you're not reaching your audience? Do you feel like a failure when surveys come around and you're like, why isn't anyone getting my lectures? Well, this is for you, nurse educators. We're going to deep dive into grades, and grades. And it's also going to help the students as well. So listen up. I've got 5 tips for you that's going to change the way you look at managing your classroom. And it's going to make you better, and it's going to make your students feel a lot more safe and secure as well. So, how well do you know your students? Now, I'm not talking about crossing boundaries or friendships, because we know that we need to maintain a healthy professional boundary, and that means not oversharing, things of that nature. But what I mean by how well do you know your student population is, what is the demographic made up of? And this is as simple as getting reports pulled. It will tell you the demographic of your classroom, age groups, sex, gender, things like that. You can pull and get that statistical information. Other things that you can't glean from a spreadsheet but should be aware of is, what is the status of your students? Are they struggling at home with other things? Now, this is difficult because if the students don't feel comfortable talking to you, then you're never going to know that part. So, what I would say, that there's always going to be someone in that class that's struggling, that's in need of some kind of help. But if you look at it through a lens of privilege, of something else, stereotypes, then you're going to miss being able to directly help these individuals. And I think it's so easy to miss these groups of students because typically nursing education is set up as equality. Everybody does the same thing. And I think that this is a fallacy that needs to end, but that's on a different topic that we will share at another time. Instead, I want to bring us back to the fact that you just need to be aware that you have a diverse group of students that have diverse group of needs, and that you may be coming from a point of reference that never needed any of those diverse things. And so you really need to dig deep in how to connect to your audience. And we're going to come back to why that connection is so important, especially when we're talking about grades, which ultimately is going to decide the fate of these students. If you don't know your population that you serve, then it's going to be difficult to plan assignments and understand why they're not meeting certain expectations, why they aren't able to follow certain rules. Okay? And it may not be what you think it is. And you may not know these things unless you do some one-on-ones. Have some activities where you're able to communicate with the students outside of the academic world. One of the things that, when I was working in nurse education, one of the things that I found, it was very taxing, but a very good thing, was we always had some outside activities where we could combine and do things with the students outside of campus. So they saw us in our I guess you could say our down vibe, and we saw them and the things, we met their families, and things like that is really important, I believe, in morale and keeping morale up. Number 2, you should not have sewed back your Billings and Halstead. That is the Bible. That is a great resource. I know there's other texts um, that you can pull from, but Billings and Halstead, tried and true. It's a great resource to go back and just use these evidence-based things to think about what you're testing, to think about what you're writing. Number 3 is research. If you have a topic that you're nervous about, you need to do some research about it, because your audience is going to pick up on the fact that you're not prepared. Yes, these students aren't fools. They know when you've prepared and when you haven't. And I would caution you to not go into a classroom where you're unprepared. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to necessarily answer all the questions that they have. That's impossible. There are going to be questions that you're not going to be able to answer. All right. And I can give you some techniques on ways to handle those situations as those occur. Y'all just need to comment and let me know if that's a video that would also help you. But I also want you to understand and dissect what kind of research you did to be able to teach this topic. How did you use the textbook? Think about how you use other resources to help you teach this material. A part of your research, you need to be thinking about how these students, how previous cohorts tested on this material in the past. That can inform future results, right? So what we need to do is figure out, why is each cohort scoring 70%? What about these topics is the group not getting? And then that is something you need to pull out and focus on that for your teaching. All right. I think one of the common mistakes, especially new educators, you're trying to teach all the things, okay? When the student is going to have an idea of what, they may not realize it yet, but that's part of what you're going to help them to. But they're going to get some of the easier things that come to them quickly. But what your job as the educator is to help them break down that difficult topic. That is the number one priority of your teaching. So think about that. You've done the research, you've seen how the cohort's done on these previous tests. Maybe it's time to do something to get the audience in the book. All right? So pre-work, pre-assignments, I highly recommend. Everyone is not a nerd like we are. Everyone does not live with the book, sleep with the textbook, whatever with the textbook, okay? They're not at one. So we have to help them out as well and know that about them. So quizzes on your learning platform is great, especially when it cuts down time, when you can do these electronically and get, grade it, go over it, use it as a topic of reference when you're doing your lecture, or at least in a way where you cover a section and then that quiz question comes up and you can say, okay, now this, I want y'all to see how this connects to this. And let's talk about how y'all got it wrong. Now, some of the things may be, did you write the question right? Okay, so sometimes you really need to understand your syntax because you could be confusing the student. And at that point, you need to recognize that you were wrong and let them students know that, because they have enough issues with feeling low self-esteem, low confidence, that, the wrong answer is saying that everything's on them all the time, when we can be at fault too. So, owning up to that, acknowledging that is very important in the healing learning process. And it doesn't take anything off of you as the educator to admit that. You also could do a post quiz as well. So, opening up a quiz before class and doing the post quiz. I typically only do the pre quiz though. That's just me, but maybe the post quiz could work too. You also could add in, find 5 NCLEX style questions and toss that in. Okay, if that's something that you want to do. Another thing that I like to do is articles. I find a article that's easy to read but has some good questions that I think help tie in the content. Then I might make that a required reading as well, and strongly encourage the students to read that article. Strongly encourage. And not only need to say I strongly encourage, but this article could be some test taking things. So once you say test taking, they'll put more weight in looking at the article if you plan on using that article to pull test content from. Number 4, teach the way you researched. All right, so you got your PowerPoint. I love a PowerPoint. I also love doing some off the kilter things. And if any of my past students could tell you, they'd probably say there was never a normal moment. And that would either freak some students out that's used to a PowerPoint, and then there's a group that's like, whatever. We're just going to go with the flow. So you're never going to get everybody to enjoy necessarily what you're going to do. But the point is that whatever learning technique you need to have, you need to make sure that you're teaching them how to study during that lecture. And what I mean by that is, as you're going through your PowerPoint, if that's what you prefer to stay with, and I would agree that especially if you're a new nurse educator starting out, PowerPoint, you need to get comfortable having a flow and do that. Make sure that you're also teaching them how they need to be reading the chapters. So one of the things I would do if I'm teaching content is I would always talk about patho, because typically a lot of students didn't realize how patho connects to a lot of these test questions. And so one of the things I would do is I would say, look at this patho. If you understood that X, Y, and Z right here, then you would be able to answer these 3 questions no problem. And then I would break down these 3 questions that they connected with the patho and vice versa. And then we go on to our other sections. And so I would say, if you're going to study clinical manifestations, I would suggest these things. Do some note cards. Maybe you want to do a template. Maybe you want to do some matching. And then I would say with medications, I want you to study by class. It's not necessary that you memorize all these medications, but you need to understand the class and specific adverse reactions and what expectation, what are the expected findings. All right, and then if usually there's a lab section, so group like-minded labs together. Okay, what are the important labs related to this patho condition? That's what I want you to study. That's how I want you to study. And then I would make sure they know about their boxes. Boxes are gold, right? They look over the boxes, but the boxes have a lot of meat in them in these textbooks. And so reiterate, boxes are very important to you getting the material as well. And lastly but not least, because everybody's on different learning paths. So make sure you tell them, that if you're still not getting it, there's always a precursor or fundamental chapter. Maybe this is where in fundamentals you struggled and now it's coming back to haunt you. So go back into those other chapters. There's an index in your textbook. And a lot of students don't know this or underutilize it. But whenever you come across a word, a definition, if they're talking about catecholamines and you forgot the function, there's always a precursor chapter that's going to discuss those things in full. And if you're going to get this information, you may have to go back before you can go forward. And that gives them some direction to really be a beast. Now, bringing back what I said earlier about knowing your student population. So if you know your demographic is full of people who have secondary lives, they're doing the most in their outside work. Making that homework, making that stuff more powerful, using in-class time to help with thought process is going to be so much better for them than doing a lot of outside. And that's why I do the pre-quizzes versus the post-quiz. Because I figure I can help their thought process during our class time. Because I know they may not come see me on office hours. They're not going to see me on other times that they don't have to come to the school. So you really have to be cognizant of this and help them in their thought process. Use those 1 hour, 3 hours, whatever you have in that lecture period to your advantage. And the students may not like you, but gosh darn it, they will respect you for valuing their time as learners, not just reading off a PowerPoint. You don't have to be as dramatic, because I can get very drama, and that's part of my personality. You can be clear eyes, dude. But as long as you are helping them process the information, that's what matters. And so you need to be key about saying, hey, listen up, class. This is how the format of my class is going to go. We're going to start off with PowerPoints. I'm going to weave in NCLEX style questions and patho so that you can understand the connection between the two. There's then going to be time for questions. You can ask your questions during that time, not before, because if you ask me a question while I'm in my teaching, I may lose my thought, and you don't want me to lose my thought process, because this could be beneficial to you when it comes time for testing. So write down your questions that you have, and when it's time for the question area, that's when I want you to ask your questions. Next, we're going to go over the quiz and what a lot of people missed. So I'm going to get to that as well. And lastly, we're going to go through some NCLEX style questions together so that I can get a feel for how you're thinking and breaking down this material. And you just taught so much gold right there. You just helped that student with application just by your teaching process. So understand the power of what you're doing, and you're going to definitely change their lives. The other thing that I would put and be cognizant of in your teaching as you move forward is hospital life, work life, clinical life, and then test world life, because those are separate, and they need to understand how to get over their life experiences sometimes when they're testing. Sometimes they need to understand that. And so we need to explore that with them. And you need to talk about that. You know, what this looks like in the clinical, what this really looks like in the clinical. Okay, what this looks like in test life. All right, so there is a difference. There is a difference. And number 5, use the required resources. If you're going to say in your syllabus that these are our bolded texts that we use, and in your syllabus you already have the articles that you plan on using for the courses or etc., then don't choose test questions that are completely off kilter, that really brings about distrust between you and your students. You know, if you have me reading this text and I know that it's not going to be verbatim, you've already told me that. I know you're not teaching the test. But I at least should understand that when I read that text and I read from understanding and I do some application based techniques like you showed me in the class, that I should then be able to apply that to the test. All right, so be cognizant of that, making sure that's appropriate. If you're writing your own test questions, totally support that, especially in the age of cheating and buying questions off the internet and everything else that people are doing to pass these tests. It's a way that most nursing programs are going. You need to be cognizant of a lot of different things, which is your syntax, your grammar. You need to be cognizant of how to write a question. Again, Billings and Halstead is great, but your organization needs to be investing in credentialing for you to be able to do that. They need to be investing in workshops, and y'all need to have policies and committees that are checking each other's questions. You know, it should be maybe somebody from a different team looking over questions, someone more senior, someone more expert, advanced in test writing, item writing, to help you, because students understand these are grown adults. They understand when a question isn't written correctly. I mean, and don't lower their intelligence by telling them that they're not right, because you give them that point. Yes, you wrote a poor question, and everyone knows it, and you should too. You should too. So these are the things that I think that you should do that are really going to help you as an educator reach your audience better and really bridge the gap of learning, because that's what we're all about, bridging the gap of learning. And if you can do all this work in that 3 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour, whatever it is, they are going to be so thankful that you did this. Some of the best lectures I've did were when now this is for an advanced educator that feel comfortable doing this, but some of the best lectures that students got out of was when I turned off the PowerPoint, which I frequently did, and we did board work, which I wrote on the board, and we had conversations, and we talked about what the condition would look like and a care plan, and we made application through that, and it was so powerful to see, the students come up and say, hey, this was one of the best lectures that you've ever done, okay? Do it like this, okay? More often, do it like this. Like, okay, thanks. But I mean, it wasn't about me, but it was about them actually having that breakthrough. And I think if more educators get outside of themselves and know that it's not about us, okay? It's not about us. It's not about our knowledge. It's not that the students need to know how smart we are. That's not what it's about. It's about making sure that they get the breakthrough that they need. It doesn't matter that you hold all this smartness if you can't then break it down so that they can understand it. And that's the gap. That's the missing gap. So now that you know what to do, what are you going to do about it? Because I hope that you're going to make changes that are going to help bridge the gap and get these students passing and get the grade that they need to get because they've earned it, not because you had to give them points to get there, but because the way you're teaching is set up, they've earned the grade they've got and they've earned the right to pass. So before you think about assigning the work load to your students, consider, is this busy work? Or is this work that's going to help them apply the content and break down barriers? That's the question you should always be asking with any kind of things you're assigning to your students. And you're going to get a more gracious student population. As always, I'm Dr. Sharonda Sturm, and I'm glad you stuck around for this. And I hope that your academic semester, whether you're in a mini semester or a full 16-week semester, is going well. And if you have any more topics that you want me to deep dive into, we surely can do that. Email me. Email contact information is there. Please like, share, subscribe. That's how this content can keep growing. And I will see you next time around. Be good to yourself, be good to each other, and always remember, you are enough.